Welcome to my second video where we do Asteroids and GameMaker. Where we left off on the first video, we had steering and basic movement. The goal for this video is to be able to use the mouse to steer the ship, which is a really interesting lesson in actually tracking the mouse and getting it to follow the mouse. And so we're going to try to just get some mouse controls and be able to toggle those on and off during gameplay. So, this is kind of where we left off. If we want to start controlling with the mouse, we're going to want to add a new event that activates every frame. And so we're going to use the step event. And the step event is the best event to handle movement behaviors in, begin step happens before the key press events, and step happens after the friction's been calculated and stuff. So step is the best event to work on rotations and movements in. So we're inside the step event. So our goal here is to add in mouse steering. So in order to do this, we're going to need to figure out the angle from the ship to the mouse. So we're going to start by calculate the angle from the ship to the mouse. And so that's going to be var target angle equals point direction. Point direction is point underscore direction is one of GameMaker's built-in methods to calculate the angle between two things. So this is going to calculate the angle from the ship, which is x and y, to the mouse's x and to the mouse's y. So the order does kind of matter. I mean, the first two coordinates are your first point, the next two coordinates are your next point. If you were to do this in reverse, we would get the angle from the mouse to the ship, which is basically the same angle with 180 degrees added to it. So to pull up MS Paint to take a look at that, essentially what we're trying to do is that if my ship is here and the mouse cursor is right there, it's going to kind of figure out what that angle is going to be relative to the ship. So in a case like this, it's probably going to return something like 45 degrees or what have you. And so that's what we want to test to make sure that we're actually processing this correctly so that then we can start sending the command to the ship to actually start rotating. Now, where this gets a little bit tricky is we're not going to want to immediately snap to the mouse. We don't want the ship to, in one frame, turn 45 degrees. We want to actually kind of limit it to the turn speed. So that's why this is going to be kind of an interesting exploration in how to do this. So this is going to get the angle to where we want to point. Now there's another built-in method that's going to help because this is going to then figure out the best difference between them. So this is going to be var turn underscore angle equals angle underscore difference from target angle to direction. So the idea here is what we don't want to occur. Like this is fine, but another situation that could happen that would be really obnoxious is if the mouse is down here. So there's my mouse cursor. And my ship is still facing this direction. And we end up getting an angle down here, which is actually probably going to return something like 350. So what's going to happen if we don't use this method is my ship is going to try to rotate this way to face the mouse, when in actuality, it would be better if the ship were just to rotate this way. So that's what we're going to try to do here with this method of angle difference. This actually returns, so you see it returns the smallest angle difference between the two angles at a value from negative 180 to positive 180. So that'll facilitate in us turning. So it will then give us, instead of giving us an angle of 315, which is not useful, it'll actually give us an angle of negative 45. And that's more informative for us, because then we know that it's going to be a right turn to go to the cursor of the mouse. And so that's what this method here is going to do. So we're using the angle difference. If I can spell it correctly here. I mean, this is a comment, so I guess it doesn't technically matter. Now, for the sake of debugging, let's make sure that this is actually getting us the measurements that we want. So let's use the show_debug message command, and we're going to print out some stuff. So we're going to print out the mouse X location. Now notice, like, I actually have to cast, there's a method to cast mouse X, which is a floating point number, into a string. So unlike Java or like C family languages, it's not going to let me just concatenate a number in here. So I'm going to print out the mouse X followed by the mouse Y. And then I'm going to print out, right under it, the angle to the mouse, which is that target angle. And I'm going to print out the desired turn angle, which is the one that we just calculated. So we can at least make sure that this is behaving in a way that we would expect. So if we look down here on the bottom, we can actually see all this stuff coming out to the console. Up here in the top left, as I said, you can see that this is basically a mouse X of 0, Y of 0. Down in the bottom right is the upper dimensions. So positive Y goes this way. So angle to the mouse is 0 degrees, which makes sense. Now down here where it says like angle to mouse 350, you can see that it's creating a desired turn angle of -9, rounded up -10. So that way it would know to turn right 10 degrees rather than trying to turn 350 degrees, like in the incorrect direction. So it looks like it is calculating all this. If you wanted to play around with the trigonometry, just for the sake of argument, if you wanted to use trig, there is two different versions of sine. So sine actually uses radians, but GameMaker thankfully builds in a degrees version of sine. So we can maybe get the sine of where the mouse is, just to do it. Oops, I crashed. We can actually see this crash here. Not a very clear one. Let's see what went wrong. Oh, so was it very clear on that? No, it just said do add. So this was a pretty difficult to diagnose issue. And that's because this is going to be a number and I didn't remember to cast it to a string. So you can see, much like trigonometry would say that, the sine value of 1 for this 90 degrees up here and a sine value of -1 for about the 270 value. So that just verifies that my computations are working correctly. I'm going to comment these out. I'm going to leave them there because they're interesting, but I am going to comment those out because we're not going to use that. Try to include the whole thing here. So if you missed part of it, you could pause the video and screenshot that. So let's actually get the player ship to turn. So what we need to do next is limit my turn to only turn up to my turn speed. So if the absolute value of turn angle is greater than turn speed. So for example, if I'm trying to turn 30 degrees, but my turn speed is limited to, as we look over here, my turn speed is only 10. If we're trying to turn 30 degrees, we don't want to turn 30 degrees. We only want to turn 10 degrees per frame. So we're going to readjust this to say turn angle equals the sine of the old turn angle times turn speed. So this is a really fancy way to kind of, it's not necessarily a clamp function, but it's a fancy way to restrict the values of turn angle to only up to turn speed. If it says to rotate 8 degrees, well, 8 degrees is not greater than my turn speed, so it's going to still stay 8 degrees. But this prevents me from having to do two different if statements for the negative case and the positive case. If turn angle is -30, I just take the absolute value of it, becomes +30. 30 is greater than my turn speed of 10. And then when I recompute my turn angle, I just look to see what the sine, the positive and negative sine of what my projected turn angle was and multiply it by turn speed. So a little bit more elegant way to limit the turning angle to only a max of turn speed. And then actually apply the turn. So we will apply the rotation. Remember that we are both modifying the image angle, which is the appearance of the sprites, as well as the direction, which is the direction of motion. And a quick syntax thing. When we create new local variables, we just declare them as var. A var creates a local variable that only exists during this script. If you wanted to create something else, you could technically just say turn angle like that. And you can see that GameMaker is not very happy about this because now you're basically creating it as an instance variable, but you're creating an instance variable during the execution of a single frame. That's why GameMaker is giving you a warning that you're supposed to declare your instance variables inside of the create event, or alternatively declare your instance variables over here. So if you don't put var, it becomes an instance variable, which we only need this for this script, so we don't need to track turn angle. Then we apply the rotation. So when we hit play, the ship will now track the mouse. And so we can follow the mouse if we want. Gets a little bit strange behavior once it gets to the mouse because it's just going to rotate around it. But that way, if you wanted to aim using the mouse, this could also show you how to design it so that like wherever the mouse is pointing, maybe you could attack towards the mouse. So you don't have to necessarily use this. And let's take a look at making this optional. Maybe you want to keep to the regular rotation, but the keys aren't working because now the mouse rotation is taking over. So let's retool this to allow this to be an optional thing. So we're going to want to add a new variable here. And I'm going to call this use_mouse steering. And instead of a real number, I'm going to switch this to being a boolean. And so I'm going to enable it by default. And then we're going to encase all of this code right here inside of an if statement. If use underscore mouse steering. So all that will only take place if we have it. And so what we can do over here inside of my turn left and turn right is we could encase this inside of an if statement. So if use mouse steering equals false, then we will do that. And so we'll just make that same change to the right. We will do if use underscore mouse steering equals false. Now, if you don't like equals false, you can just do exclamation mark there. GameMaker does support that. So that means not. So mouse steering is either going to be true or false. So it's just going to not that. So if the mouse steering is false, it'll negate it to become true. I personally think that this is easier to interpret when you're just skimming the code. So I do prefer to use equals false. But this is effectively the same thing. And so now let's just add a key that lets us swap that. We will do that inside of the step function. So we can take a look at how to use keyboard detection. So we'll pick a key if, now the GameMaker event for this is keyboard underscore check. Now you can see that there's 3 of them, and these are actually this, well, there's track directly. I'm not sure what that one is. Oh, that one is for more a hardware thing. So of the options here, the ones that are most interesting to us are going to be keyboard check pressed, and keyboard released. So they correspond to the same 3 that we had over here for our events. Key down is keyboard check. Key pressed is keyboard check pressed. And then key released is keyboard up. So I just only want to trigger once. Now, the command for an individual key is ORD, and then the string, I believe it's lowercase. And so this will, I have all my, missing my parentheses here. And this will set use mouse steerings to the opposite of what use mouse steering was. So if it was true, now it's going to be false. It just flips the Boolean. And I chose pressed because I only want to trigger it once per key press. And so if I push the P key, it'll toggle my mouse steering off and on. If I didn't, basically what would happen is it would trigger every frame. And so if I hold the key down for more than 1 frame, it may flip it like 3 or 4 times, and it would be hard to predict. So if you want to experiment, you can just try to take off pressed and see what happens. So here's our thing. We got our mouse steering. If I push the P key, well, perhaps it's uppercase. So let's swap that to uppercase P. Yeah, it's uppercase. And so when I push the P key, notice that the ship stops tracking, and I can go back to using my arrow keys to control it. If I push the P key, it immediately goes back to using the mouse control. And so just for reference, I'm going to add a quick breakdown of those. So we have keyboard check. This is so this will activate true every frame the key is down. keyboard check pressed will be true only the first frame the key is pressed, and keyboard check released is true only the first frame the key is released. So those are our three keyboard check commands, which correspond to the actions under here. And so we can use that to toggle off and on mouse control of the ship. So that's going to wrap up this video. Now that we know how to do mouse control, there's some really cool things you can do with this. In the next video, what we're going to do is actually add in a background and give the engine some effects so that when the ship's moving around, we get some particles coming out of the back of the ship, so a little bit more excitement there. So stay tuned for that video, and thank you for watching.